Amen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Here to present this item tonight is Barbara Spudauer, one of the directors at WR Clark. And I'll just turn it over to her to make a presentation.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'm Barbara Spudauer, Director of CCA Development and Western Riverside Council of Governments. WRCOG represents the 18 cities in the county on regional issues, and I'd like to thank Councilmember Bash for his active participation on our executive committee. And I'm here to give an update on program and other sister agency that we've been developing and working on for community choice aggregation. If I move forward. Sorry. So what is community choice aggregation? Under AB 117, it allows for a local jurisdiction either by itself or a city to come together under a joint powers agreement to purchase energy and still utilize the IOU's distribution lines. So, and why are jurisdictions looking at this? Jurisdictions are looking at this really to create local control over energy programs, setting rates, and being able to purchase the energy power supply that they'd like to purchase. In doing this, it also provides the opportunity for lower and/or competitive rates with the IOU, in our case, which is Southern California Edison. It also provides economic development where you can set rates that are attractive to businesses that you want to bring into the area, so it has an economic driver as well. The concept's not new. CCAs have been operational mainly in Northern California, starting with Marin about 9 to 10 years ago, followed up with Sonoma County 5 or 6 years ago. They're very successful programs. They continue to expand. They do offer savings to their residents and businesses in their process. They also, their focus is more on greenhouse gas reductions, and they meet their goals because that is what they're focused on. In the Southern California region, what we have is the city of Lancaster is operational. It's been up and running for about 4 years. Pico Rivera just came online. The town of Apple Valley also came online last October. We're expecting a number of jurisdictions within the Southern California Edison territory to come online in 2018. In our region, the city of San Jacinto is expected to launch in the early spring. Coachella Valley, they have 4 desert cities, and they're expected to launch in the July through August timeframe. The County of Los Angeles now has 26 of its cities joined into the county's program, and they're trying to launch starting in February moving forward. And Riverside County Unincorporated is expected to launch in the summer of 2018 as well, and that's for the unincorporated area only. The current process that we have, or the choices that residents have, is the source, Edison, buys the power, then Edison delivers the power to the customer. What changes with the CCA is the CCA purchases the power, Edison continues to deliver the power to the customer. So the only piece that is changing is that front end piece on who is actually purchasing the power. CCAs are at the time able to purchase power cheaper than what Edison has on its books. They have entered into contracts back when the power outages were occurring, and they were forced into high price contracts. Now contracts are a lot lower, so you can pass on that savings to consumers. So do they save money? As I said earlier, Marin and Sonoma has met their objectives in providing savings to their residents. They show a $6 million savings in just utility cost. In 2014, the city of San Rafael, which is a middle-sized city, from its municipal facilities was able to save $47,000. When you look at our sub-region, the Western Riverside region, if everyone participated, that's eligible, which is about 13 jurisdictions, that's about $30 million that could annually be saved within the sub-region. So what are residential savings looking like? We've run some pro formas over the past When we did our feasibility study that showed between a 4-5% savings that can be passed on, we've run some additional scenarios, show you a low end of what a 2% savings. If we had about 147,000 residential units, it'd be on a 2% savings, about $2.4 million utility savings that residents would see combined, 4% doubling to almost $5 million. When you get into just the city of Norco, it's about $120,000 on a 2% savings, or $240,000 on a 4% savings. So what does your bill look like if you're a CCA customer? And these are my bills. I just want to be upfront. They look the same. Your bill still comes from Edison. The only piece that changes is what's circled at the bottom. That used to say Edison generation rates. It would now say Western Community Energy rates. And that's where they would see the savings. When we ran our pro formas, this has us launching in late 2018 and a full year of 2019, again for the 147,000 residential and commercial units. That's about 2.2 gigawatts hours of energy that needs to be purchased. We would have potentially over an $8 million revenue in the first half of the year that builds upon 26 to up to $45 million by year 2.5. And when I talk about revenue, this is excess revenue that the Western Community Energy Board would make determination on. It can either put more money into its operating reserves. It can take this money into the rate stabilization fund in case rates change on Edison's side and you want to continue to be lower. You can implement more energy efficiency programs with this money, or you can just pass that savings, more savings, back to the residents. And that'll be up for the Western Community Energy, for the governing board to decide. So if the City of Norco joined, you would have a seat at the table on the board, and you would help make those determinations of where that money goes. Our expenses, again, the biggest expense being power supply. We've been directed to create this agency utilizing WRCOG as its resources. So being able to tap into our already existing meeting structures gives us the benefit of just being able to piggyback off of meetings that are already occurring where your staff and/or elected officials are participating to build in those efficiencies and utilizing WRCOG staff time. We have some phasing that we've talked about doing, which is to bring in all customers in the first phase, and then bring in those CARE and FARA customers and the net metering customers in about 6 months later. And the reason we're looking at doing that, especially on the net metering side, is because when a net metering customer is with Edison, the day they have their solar installed and their interconnect done, 12 months later, Edison does a true-up. And so at that point, the customer either has generated an excess energy and they get paid out through Edison, or they get a bill from Edison that says they didn't generate enough for that 12-month period. And so that happens all the time throughout the year. So we want to make sure that we figure out when the best time is to bring all of those types of customers across so that it's an easy transition. Because if your solar system was installed in October and you're and we pick a date maybe in January, you may end up owing Edison because your system doesn't perform as much in the wintertime as it does in the summertime. So it's a complex issue that we recognize, and we want to make sure that bringing those customers across is is a smoother transition. Bottom line, again, we did a feasibility study that we adopted back in December of 2016. We did a study alongside San Bernardino County and the Coachella Valley, again, showing that we could do a 4.4% savings onto the residents and businesses based on high conservative numbers. So how will it work? Must all residents participate? The answer is no. This is a unique program in that the legislature has made it an opt-out program. And what that means is if the city joins, then it's joining on behalf of its residents and businesses. And those customers automatically are in unless they opt out to Edison. And they can opt out to Edison. So in notifications, we do need to notify residents and make sure they understand this is what's coming down the line. If you don't want to be part of Western Community Energy, that's fine. You can stay with Edison. If you, once launched, if customers can go back at any time. If they do go back, Edison is requiring that they stay with them for a 12-month period. So you don't have a customer jumping from month to month back and forth. So, but customers can come back and they can go back. So they have a choice. Will we be able to compare the CCA rates to Edison? Yes. Once a year, we need to get with Edison to find out what their rates are that are coming out. The board sets Western Community Energy's rates. We have to show them and then send that notification out to all residents and businesses so that they'll see what the rates are. They have this is another opportunity for them if they don't like what they see, that they can go back to Edison if they so desire. Or if they're with Edison and they want to come into WCE, then they're able to do so. Again, there's always flexibility for them to go back or come back, depending their circumstances. Additional benefits on the CCA. Edison has really good programs. Unfortunately, Edison's territory is 6 counties. They have limited funding. All customers pay a public goods charge, and that's what Edison and the IOUs utilize for their energy efficiency programs. Customers under a CCA continue to pay that public goods charge because it's on the delivery side of the bill. So customers still get those benefits from Edison. The Western Community Energy will be able to enhance those programs. So as a thought, the board could say it wanted an additional rate decrease for low income or multifamily. It has that ability to add additional benefits to the existing programs. Sonoma County's focused right now on purchasing electric vehicle chargers for in-home and providing those to residents while still maintaining ownership of that asset, but freely installing those into homes so that residents can purchase more electric vehicles. That's one program that they have initiated, and that's an option that the board can consider in developing if it wanted to do new programs. We can expand our Holiday Light program, which we presently do. City of Norco participates every year. We come out and give out free Christmas lights to residents. Another program, you can expand it, and we can have more events, give out more lights. It just stretches Edison's programs further. What are risks? And there are risks. We always hear this sounds too good to be true. What's up? We agree. You always have the legislation and regulatory changes. You have elected bodies in Sacramento who are looking for 100% renewable energy purchasing of all IOUs. It's costly. It's one that we actually were able to fight this last time around. There's legislation that's been to get rid of CCAs because the northern utility has not been enamored with someone moving into their profit stream. Our conditions are a little different. Edison does not own as much of its own generation facilities as other utilities throughout the state. So for them, generation is pretty much a pass-through with the added cost of them being able to manage those purchases. Increase in energy cost. There's always the market is fluctuating and it goes up and down. So there is always that threat of, you could have increased energy costs. You could actually have where Edison decreased its costs. Haven't seen it happen, but it could. Ways that you can really manage this is through the rate stabilization fund So if you see energy rates going up or Edison's costs going down, you're able to stabilize and still provide your savings to your constituents until it levels back out. What are our startup costs? Right now, they're estimated between $3 to $7 million. WRCOG is covering those funds and would be repaid back once the agency is up and servicing load. In addition, if anything else is needed, the new agency would be able to take out a loan if it really needed to. How do cities join? City councils actually take an action to join the JPA. You get a seat on the board. Council holds a public hearing. They would adopt a CCA ordinance that says we want to participate. Impacts to staff, city staff, really is just to provide information at the counter, direct all phone calls to us, similar to how we run the HERO program. What happens next? We're looking for about 2.2 gigawatt hours. That's about maybe 5 or 6 jurisdictions to really get us out the gate. Jurisdictions can always come on at a later time if they so desire. We're just looking to try to get our board established and get the ball rolling. The first step in that ball rolling, once the board's established, is that we need to submit an implementation plan to the Public Utilities Commission. And really what that does is it lays out the goals and objectives of the agency and what its energy forecasts are and what its budget looks like and how does it plan to proceed and work with its existing IOU. WRCOG's been working. We developed a draft or template JPA and bylaws. Again, we were directed to create a standalone agency instead of opening up WRCOG's JPA. We have a marketing firm on hand to help us with developing outreach materials and getting out into the communities. We have consultants hired. The Energy Authority will manage the portfolio. EES Consultant is our technical consultant, and I have Gary Saliba in the audience with me if you have any technical questions. And then we continue meeting with the member jurisdictions to discuss and answer questions and see how their interests lay. Our timetable seems to move continuously. Again, cities can come in at any time that they want to come in. We're trying to think of a way to group cities together. We get a mass, we launch, we get more cities together, we add them so that we have a continuously rolling with a goal of a servicing load in the August or September timeframe. And that completes my presentation, Mr. Mayor, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Staff have any questions of Ms. Boonhauer? Greg? Any questions? This is the first one. There you go.
Good evening.
Hello.
Just two quick questions. You talked about WRCOG funding to get this started. What funding mechanism would WRCOG be using?
WRCOG's using its excess HERO revenues.
Okay. So would that be taking away from the HERO program?
No.
Okay. So the HERO program has X amount of dollars excess.
Correct.
Okay. Then on your operating reserves, that would be maintained at 7% throughout, and you had a statement of fact in here that it could be used for rate stabilization, that let's say the dynamics change and for our residents to maintain this 2 to 4% savings, you would be going into your reserves to stabilize that rate. What if that is long prolonged? What's going to make up for that surplus?
So
how would you backfill your surplus?
certainly. So there are two types of, you have your operating reserve, and then you also have at the bottom what's called a program surplus fund. So you could theoretically, you could draw from that as well. And then again, that goes back, that's a board decision. If the board doesn't, if the board wants less than 7% going into its operating reserve, or if it wants more, that's the direction board gives staff to implement. Our consultants will advise and provide guidance. If it gets to, if there's a point where the Western Community Energy decides it doesn't want to exist, it has that that as well. But again, that goes back to board decisions. So the elected official who's representing the city.
Okay. And then this may actually be a staff question, but take a shot at it anyways.
Give it a try.
This is one side of the equation. This is WRCOG's presentation, but we have yet to hear from Edison on is this a good program or not? And do we have that opportunity, Andy, to have a presentation from Edison on?
It's not something that we have looked at, but Edison is participating in this discussion with WRCOG.
Yes, and as a follow-up, this seems strange, but it seems strange in a way and strange with the not in a way with the history that has occurred. There is actually a code of conduct that was passed at the PUC because of negative impacts that PG&E was doing to the County of Marin as they were launching their program. So the IOUs have actually been muffled in being able to share, pleasure, displeasure of CCAs. We find that frustrating because we'd really like to we have a really good working relationship with Edison, and you'd really like to get into the weeds with them, but they are cut off intentionally. They have made public statements. They are more in the delivery and distribution side. That's where they make their money because they own those assets. So they have gone on record to say that they're not concerned about losing their generation piece because where they really make their money is on the distribution side.
Thank you.
Kevin, anything?
Nothing but except to confirm that I do know that Edison is playing ball pretty well on this. But other than that, nothing further.
Berwin, anything? Rob? Okay. And then I have one. I take it that on this before, we're essentially going to be commodities and future buyers through WRCOG. That's what this is.
Correct.
And that would be whoever we had doing that, or who WCE, if they did it, that would be the make or breaker on this thing, is the expertise of someone like that actually does that. And
Right.
I would imagine, and I would hope that they would have a reliable firm or a firm that they're going to pay to do that, rather than a bunch of community leaders and somebody from outside. Because that's the whole crux of this thing, is watching what the legislators are going to be, correct? Is that on that?
Yes, that is a big piece of it. And yes, I completely agree with you. I would not have me purchasing or, the stock market. That's not what I am. We have hired the Energy Authority. They are actually owned by 8 municipal utilities. They purchase energy on behalf of municipal utilities as well as some private utilities. And they have the expertise in guiding us through that whole process of making sure we are getting a good deal on the energy being purchased.
Okay, thank you. This is a discussion item only. Cheryl, do we have any, were there cards on it, or is this any hearing that we have to have?
Yes, Mayor, I do have one card.
Okay, good, thank you, Ms. Mumauer, appreciate that.
Certainly, thank you.
Gary Schoen.
Evening, Gary.
Ted, Council. I used to work for a large infrastructure contractor in the power generation business. I didn't work in that division, but that's the company, our parent company. And I look at this, and after listening to Monday's presentation, I did a little research, and one of the slides that was posted on this indicated that there is a possibility our rates could go up. We have, right now, an infrastructure with Edison. Edison negotiates the rates for our energy. And I kind of question what makes us think that we could, as a smaller organization, come in and do better at negotiating for rates than a large power company that services multiple counties. The second thing that makes me curious is having worked in the corporate world, one of the things that eats up corporate profit is overhead. And what I see us doing, if we join this, is adding to the overhead that's going to be in place for us to get our energy. And they don't have exact cost on this. And one of the slides mentioned, they're looking to borrow multi-million dollars and that to be repaid through the rates that we pay. Well, it's an unknown cost. What we're going to get our rates for is unknown. It's got to be submitted to the Public Utility Commission. What they're going to approve is unknown. And are we willing to step this deep into the unknown for the potential of maybe saving 2%, 4% at the best? And that's all subject to what we as a smaller group can negotiate our power purchases for. I personally don't think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Gary.
That concludes public comments.
All right, public hearing's closed on this matter. Bring it back to the council. Got a first and second to receive and file.
Council members Newton, Hannah, Bash, Mayor Pro Tem Grunmeyer, Mayor Hoffman.
Yes.
That motion carries 4-1.
Moving right along to the second item, it's public hearing. Just a reminder, again, this is only on the districting topic at all. There'll be no other public comments on it. So if you're going to speak on the districting matter, have get a card so that the city clerk can fill it out. All right. So this is public hearing number 4 regarding potential district boundaries relating to transition from at-large to district-based council member elections. And I'm going to turn this over to our city attorney. You all right? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, Chris, I'm on. This is public hearing number 4 of the, in order to examine potential maps for potential districting for voting in the city. I think most of you know why we're here, but very briefly, back in October, the city received a letter from a law firm, Mr. Schenkman, indicating that felt that the city was in violation of the California Voting Rights Act and making a demand that the city remedy that by adopting districts for the purposes of voting. The statute gives the city 90 days within which to make a decision, and if they choose to go to districting, not be exposed to substantial attorney's fees. The cap is $30,000. As I think probably all of you have seen from the prior slides, that other cities which have either fought or struggled against and ultimately gave up and settled have paid substantial amounts of money. I mean, the city of Palmdale, which is the poster child for all this, notwithstanding whatever they paid for their attorneys, paid Mr. Schenkman $4.5 million. The flip side of that is that this has actually never been litigated. Cities, because of the potential exposure, have generally, cities and school districts, have generally decided to adopt districts rather than run the risk of potentially paying multi-million-dollar judgments and then being forced to do it by a court in any case. You're going to ask me, but if I may as well just comment on the
Okay.
the Poway case. There, as for those of you here at the last meeting, as you may be aware, the city of Poway received the same letter, adopted districts about a year or so ago. The former mayor of Poway, Mr. Higginson, is very unhappy about that and filed suit against the city of Poway and the California State Attorney General, Mr. Becerra, alleging that the California Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional under the federal Constitution, and that we should be bound only by the federal Voting Rights Act. As again, maybe you heard from the last meeting, there was a motion for preliminary injunction filed on behalf of Mr. Higginson that was to be heard January the 18th. It turns out federal courts do what they like, and so they actually heard it on January the 15th. Don't know how you get away with that. But at the same time, and one of the things which we thought was going to delay this somewhat is other cities have become involved in providing input through generally amicus briefs. The cities of Mission Viejo, Fullerton, Arcadia, Barstow, Glendora, South Pasadena, and West Covina. It turns out that because two of those cities, I do representation for them, and as a consequence, Norco, through my office, is now involved in a working group composed of basically the city attorneys from those cities, looking at other alternatives and defenses and legal arguments related to the Poway case and the constitutionality. The plus of all that is that at least we'll be at the front end of what's going on. The preliminary injunction hearing was held on, as I said, January the 15th, and the court listened to arguments, and nobody can really tell where the court was going. The court, on the one hand, said, boy, that sure sounds like extortion to me. No kidding. But on the other hand, said, you know, I'm not sure that I have the authority to affect what the state of California does vis-a-vis its voting rights. The court took the preliminary injunction under submission, which means he gets to sit on it until he renders a decision, and there is no date been given for when that decision might come down. Otherwise, the process is continuing. It doesn't slow down the litigation. Right now, they're in the process of going through, how can I say this in layman's terms, kind of mediation discussions, settlement discussions, setting up things for the trial. We would not expect, however, that the trial would occur until, at best, probably summer, and that's optimistic. At any rate, that's where that stands. If the preliminary injunction is granted, then all the things we're talking about here, at least arguably, are moot. That the Norco nor any other city would be required to go forward with the formation of districts, but we have no idea when the decision's going to come down. And as a lawyer, frankly, the ability to grant preliminary relief as opposed to after having gone through a trial is a real uphill battle. So if you were betting, you'd have to say that it's much more unlikely that there will be a preliminary injunction granted than likely, because he has to enjoin the state of California from enforcing its Voting Rights Act. A pretty substantial decision without a trial. At any rate, that's where we stand. And so, as I said tonight, this is an opportunity for the public, the fourth opportunity. There will be another one for the public to comment on maps. And we have, I didn't see him, but our demographer is next up.
Good evening, Dr. Lemus, right? Levitz. See, I was close.
I used to say like the furniture chain, but it's no longer in
No,
business. So.
no. Good evening.
So, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public. Thank you for coming tonight. The city attorney has done an excellent job going through what's going on with the cases and what's going on in the process. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that tonight, but I'm happy to answer any questions based on our experience working with just about every jurisdiction in the Inland Empire who is going through this process right now. As you mentioned, this is the fourth public hearing, the fourth meeting on this topic. So tonight we have our original 2 maps and 3 additional new maps to look at tonight, based on the public comment and feedback and testimony that we've received. So far, we've received over 90 individual residents of Norco submit public comment at some stage in the process, including about 40 simply since the last week alone. And we continue to really encourage members of the public. Thank you all for showing up here tonight and speaking about this issue. And please continue to do so as we look toward the 5th and final public hearing. As the slide indicates, the first 2, depending on the legal situation, but if districts take effect, 2 districts would be up for election in 2018, and the 3 would be up in 2020. And then we'd be looking at the 2020 census at potentially adjusting the boundaries based on population changes since 2010. Now, any jurisdiction, any city, anywhere in the state that draws districts has to follow a certain set of principles, and these maps are drawn to comply with those principles. All of the maps we have to present tonight are legal maps. They would meet the basic legal requirements and would fulfill any potential threat coming forward. The first criteria we have to follow is population equality. Districts have to have more or less the same number of people. Within the largest district can't be any more than 10% larger than the smallest district. And in a city this size, that's about 4,800 people. Really small, much smaller than, City of Riverside's council districts, much smaller than the City of LA's city council districts. But that's the way the 2010 census counted the population, about 22,000. And we divide that in 5 to get the number of people in each city council district. In addition, we have to follow the Federal Voting Rights Act. We have looked to see whether or not there's any concentrations of groups that have historically faced discrimination or barriers to registration and voting at the federal level or at the state level. And we've made sure to comply with this by not dividing up the community in such a way it might constitute diluting their vote. It might be diluting their potential vote. Now, make it clear, we can't draw a majority, majority Latino district, can't draw a majority African American district, we can't draw a majority Asian American district. But there is a small community in South Norco and along Hamner that we've kept together in each of the maps we'll show you tonight. We also look at traditional redistricting criteria. These are things that we balance with the legal criteria in order to, and this is really the factors that are subjective. Every city has different communities of interest, has different neighborhoods. We received about 9 people who've submitted maps where they've just circled the entire city as one community of interest. And it makes sense. I mean, my old neighborhood in the city of San Diego, where I lived for 8 years, was larger than the city of Norco. And that was one small little neighborhood of a city. So how do we think of neighborhoods or communities in such a way? And one option is, and one thing we think about is that each district then maybe looks like a cross-section of the city. Maybe it's such a way that each member feels like they still have a stake in the north, the west, the south, the east, as much of variation as possible across the city to minimize the impact of districts on the city. And so that's one of the things we really look at, and this is what we really rely on people talking to us about specific neighborhoods and communities as we move forward through the process. In addition, we look at respecting the voters' wishes as the principle. This is the principle that this lawsuit is not or this letter that the city received is not something that the city chose to adopt, and we should minimize the impact on city residents by looking at ways of respecting their choices. As voters of the city, you elected a city council. Redistricting shouldn't be used as a way of targeting a particular member. And finally, we look at growth since 2010, potential growth in the next 3 years. In a city as small as Norco, maybe even a few people, a few new homes in a particular area might be a reason to overpopulate or underpopulate a district by a few people compared to the others. In addition to the maps here tonight, we have the great larger size maps on the back, as well as individual copies of the maps. We also have an online viewer where you're able to search for addresses or for locations within the city to turn on and off each of the maps. And as of tonight, we've put the 3 new maps on there as well. So encourage everyone to go look at it when they can. So the first 2 maps we'll talk about were the maps we had to present at the last meeting last Wednesday, the green map and the purple map. So the green map looked at creating, balancing a few of the different principles. We wanted to create a plan in this one that, as we see here, keeps District 4 along more or less the eastern side of the city, all of the foothill areas, with District 5 in South Norco. And what we did here was we took 2 districts across the freeway in the north end, District 5 along the river in the north, and District 3 along the central part of the city. District 2 is in the northeast. This map keeps each council member in a separate seat. We also had to look at last time the purple map. The purple map was an attempt to present a different way of looking at some of the different communities of interest in the city. In this one, we gave District 1 the entire length of the river in the north end, so that it could also come in to get some of the commercial areas along Hamner. And so 4 out of the 5 districts have a commercial area along either Hamner or 6th Street in this map. But you know, these were 2 initial drafts we started with, and we heard a lot of feedback about these maps at the last meeting. And as a result of the feedback we've seen, we've looked at 3 new options to present tonight. And in particular, one of the comments we've seen a lot of feedback was about the areas on the western end of the city, particularly the peninsula, JR spread, the areas along River Run. And so what we've done is we've created a district in these maps, District 3, in the yellow on the maps here, that would keep as much of that area together as possible on the western end of the city. And so what the yellow map does, it starts with the green map. We take District 2 and we make sure it goes all the way to Hamner, it goes across the 15 freeway, so that 4 districts on this map have some population or some area along Hamner. We tried to get a map with all 5. There literally are just not enough roads that cross the freeway in order to make that feasible, especially given that the large number of people that live in the foothills. In addition, we looked at a slightly different alternative on the green map that takes Districts 1 and 2 and looks at them, making them more horizontal. Again, District 3, what we've done is we've actually taken as much of the bluffs as we can out of District 3 to keep it all together as much as possible in District 2. Because unfortunately there's a long census block that goes all along the river that pretty much half of the length of the city, and that contains a lot of people who live in the bluffs. And so what this map does is it keeps that in the areas kind of north of Norco Road together in District 2. This one uses Hamner as a major dividing line in both Districts 3, 5, 1, and 2. Each have a substantial portion of some of the businesses along Hamner. In both the yellow map and the tan map, one of the things we've done is we've tried to take green as far into the southeast as possible. We run into a little bit of a challenge, as I mentioned, with the Voting Rights Act, in keeping this community together to avoid vote dilution. So we haven't divided that neighborhood, but we're able to take 4 more into the southwest, and we're able to give District 2 in both the yellow map and District 1 in the tan map more of that northeastern part of the city. And finally, the orange map creates something along the lines of a transformation of the purple map. So we still have a district that kind of runs the length of the city east to west along the river. And then we kind of, in the southwest, we also have a district that runs both River Road and Parkside in the south, to get as much of the population that kind of, or to make sure it's not just in that tightly knit peninsula River Run area. It also has some of the larger properties on the very south end of the city. In this district, District 2 then is a real central district. Most of the population is south of Norco Road between 6th and 5th Streets. And on all these maps, we tried to take District 5 just a little bit northward to keep that community between 5th and 4th together as much as possible. And so, I'm happy to talk about any of these maps in more detail or answer any questions. I'm here again to take feedback, and if there is anything that we can bring back to you at the next meeting to help make this decision, then we're happy to do so. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Levitz. Ms. Berwin, I'll start with you. Any questions of Dr. Levitz or any staff?
Thank you, sir. No, it's on. Looking at your 3 new maps that we got today, I don't think it's fair to the sitting council people, because the way it works, on 3 of us are doubled up on some of them. So I understand Corona has the same problem over there, and one of their sitting, or 2 of their sitting council people, one of them has 2 years left on his term, the other person's term is up, so if she was going to run again, she wouldn't get to run again because they're in the same district, and that's the way it's throwing us here. 3 of us are overlapping there on one map or another. I don't like that at all. I think the first 2 maps you drew were pretty good on keeping everybody together, the sitting council people all in a seat. But how do you justify that when you do that and you cut somebody out of a seat on the next election, and 2 of us that are being cut out, our terms are up at the same time? How do you justify that?
This is part of, unfortunately, one of the trade-offs we often have to just think about in redistricting. That's why we do have the 2 maps that don't have any council members paired, both of which are legal and valid and perfectly good maps. We wanted to show you a couple of different options based on the feedback and testimony that we heard, received since the last meeting. But you're right. If there's 2 members that are on 2 different cycles, then that's going to create an issue of which year is that district going to be up, which council member is going to have to either wait for 2 years to run in that seat or run 2 years early, as happened in Pasadena School District. And it creates a lot of confusion for voters. And it may be a reason not to select a map that does that.
Well, one of the sitting council people, their term is up this year. So if we had to adopt either one of the other 2 maps, that would cut 2 of us out in 2020. So that's just all I want to say on the subject. Robin, you got to turn this off or use it.
I do have a couple of questions. You keep referring to keeping the neighborhood in District 5 together, and we have the percentages. Can you tell me how many actual voters are in the protected class, like the number of people?
It's,
Or like, are we talking about 3 to 5 people are swaying the percentage that we need to keep that group together, or it's 25 or 30 people?
So, District 5 in all of the maps is about 30% Latino by eligible voting population. All the other districts are below 25%. Most of them are below 20%. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the number, voter share, it's an imprecise measure. It uses last names. Actually, that's why the courts say eligible voters, not because that's based on self-reporting as Latino rather than last names. In terms of the percentage of voters that are Latino, it's again with that that note that it's based on surname data, it's small. It's about, I think, 15 to 20%, at least in turnout in the 2014 and 2012 elections. So we're talking in the hundreds. We're not talking about in the thousands, but hundreds is, in a district of 4,800 people, hundreds can be a more substantial part.
Right. And then, just as information for myself and trying to gather part of the big picture, before Mr. Shankman started to make his business going around changing municipalities into district, on average, how many municipalities would you assist in going to the district process before, and how many do you assist now?
That's a great question. Before 2003, before the California Voting Rights Act, there were 29 cities in California that used district elections, and about a similar number of school districts. As of the next election of 2018, there will be approximately 105 cities that use district elections unless we have something like an injunction against it.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have for now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Kevin? I did it myself, Berwin. Good job. Yeah. See, that's why we don't want to be in districts together, because Robin knows how to do this stuff. I just have one question. I was talking to an elected official in another city, and they said one of the ways that they kind of triumph is somehow, it doesn't matter how many voters, they make a list of all the surnames, and they say it's very possible that this many people would vote. And that's the argument they use. Do you know what she was talking about? Is that really true? They don't really know how many will vote, they just kind of guess.
So, some of the political data companies do it that way. Now, the way we do it in data sheets that you have and available here is we use the data that basically looks at people who did vote. Because when you vote in the polls or when you send your mail-in ballot, there's a record of who cast the vote. And what we do is you run the surname list, just all the names that the census identifies as being generally or predominantly Latino, through the list of people who voted. And it's a 1 if it's a Latino surname, it's a 0 if it's not. Now, we're using actual lists of people who did vote, 2012 to 2014, to give you an estimate of what the turnout was. But it really is that imprecise.
My question is, what is, for example, I mean, I guess Azevedo would be a Spanish surname. So technically, we've had a Hispanic on council. I know that's not true, but I mean, what does Mr. Shankman use to determine? Does he use that where he just kind of guesses how many people are not being allowed to vote?
So Mr. Shankman, like us, actually uses the number of people who self-identify as Latino, called that eligible voting population. So it's not actually based on, it's actually census data. It's not based on voter records or voter registrations or who's likely to turn out or not. It's simply that census goes around and asks people, what's your ethnicity? Are you Latino or not? What's your ancestry? Every year there's a survey called the American Community Survey.
Right.
And that's where they ask the question about Latino, are you Latino? They also ask a citizenship question, are you a citizen or not? And so from this data, we can get a population of the people that are over the age of 18 who identify as Latino, who are U.S. citizens. And that's what the Department of Justice, Mr. Shankman, and everybody involved in these issues uses as their measure. We don't rely on surnames because surname data has this exact problem where, what if it's someone, when we do work, we're in Central Valley, Garces is a very common surname among both Latinos and people of Portuguese and even sometimes Catalan or even French ancestry. So how do you decide whether or not it's a Latino surname or not? Well, we avoid that by using census data where they ask people, do you consider yourself Hispanic or Latino? If so, are you not just if so, but they ask everybody, are you a citizen? If, you know, and so we use that data.
So how do they determine then who, basically they don't, it's kind of like an advanced pin the tail on the donkey. You're kind of deciding, you're kind of guessing who's being not allowed to vote, correct?
Well, what we're using is eligible voters, people who we think could theoretically register to vote. We know that voter registration and voter turnout is not always what the eligible voting population looks like, but the courts have used this eligible voting standard for 30 years now, and so that's what we've used.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Greg?
Good evening. You'd mentioned earlier about in the south part of town, a concentration. Could you explain that a little further as far as going over the charts? Percentage, what are we talking about in
Well,
that concentrated area, exactly
Yeah.
for population and percentage-wise?
Yeah, that's a good question. In this area that's below 2nd Street and pretty much east of the freeway, in so what the, you know, says South Norco, is how it's identified on all the real estate sites and community maps. It's about 40% Latino by eligible voters.
Okay.
And it's not a district by itself. It's only about 60% of a district. And so we go a little northward. This area is about 20 to 30% Latino. And then like most of the rest of the city is about 20% Latino, maybe 10% Latino, depending on where you are exactly.
And within that percentage in the south part of town, what's that population number? To get to your 40%, what?
Yeah, it's about 2,400 people there in this area here.
Out of the total 4,500 in that,
Yeah, about
approximate
48
for
yeah.
that district?
About 1,000 citizens of voting age, approximately.
Okay. So, Councilmember Hanna brought up about, you know, his concerns about certain council members running against each other and some of the difficulty that would pose. And I was looking at a City of Corona district map, and one of the districts had so many little ins and outs and jogs and, you know, just not straight defined lines like you have. And so I'll just call it like little ins and outs. At what point with a map like that are you just gerrymandering? I mean, where's that break point? Does that make sense in a way?
You know, it's a tricky question. It is a tricky question because there's a lot to gerrymandering that is in the eye of the beholder. You know, gerrymandering oftentimes is just applied to any map that a person doesn't like, because that's a good term for something you don't like. The same way, you know, we hear this all the time, and people calling their political rivals things in Congress. Now, you know, where we get into trouble is really if the only purpose of a district, the only reason why a district would exist is because it is trying to be a packing or cracking a particular protected class group. That's something where the courts have gotten involved. For example, North Carolina, the courts have gotten involved repeatedly and said that you can't have a district that just follows the freeway to connect African American neighborhoods in the north end of the state and the south end of the state. Courts have gotten involved in, you know, other Georgia. But when it comes to, you know, when it comes to our lines, we try to avoid that by talking about neighborhoods as well. So if you look at it on a map, this neighborhood here has a lot of similarities that go beyond race. Income, education, even if you look at the houses themselves on the map, they're all of similar size, they're all of similar era, design. Those are other factors that we would use to say, this could be potentially a community of interest for other reasons that also happens to be 40% Latino, and therefore might merit a second look, like a special look, making sure that we don't dilute the vote by dividing it.
That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
I'm not going to let you get it. I'm not going to let you get away that easy. You mentioned census changes, and that's the next time this would happen if we, whatever map we, and that wouldn't be until after the 2020 census, which means the data doesn't come until 2021, and it doesn't affect any changes until 2022, the next election cycle. And the ones you have done in the past, how often, or even if you have a history of our census changes that we've done, because our last census change before that, we're still working on 2010 census data, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did we go back, or did you go back to 2000 to see what we did, how much changes we had? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Did we do that?
I mean,
What I'm trying to get at
yeah.
is we develop this now. How much you think when the Census Bureau, when the new information comes, how much changes you think are going to happen, major or minor?
I think it's going to be fairly minor. I mean, I think where we've seen the biggest changes right in the center part of town, where, not the center, I mean the prison, and we've seen some major population shifts there. But like we've done here, we're going to be able to take a look at that and exclude the prison the same way that we've done in these maps here.
Okay, so that was my second question. You got rid of the prison on this,
Yeah.
on these maps. Don't have that. Good.
And I'll say most jurisdictions do that. Most cities do that.
So what we're saying is generally whatever map this council will adopt next month could be pretty much what we're going to live with if we go through with this for a long
That's-
period of time.
That's definitely possible.
Okay. And this is based on what you had just said to Mayor Pro Tem Gunmeyer, 105 cities, because I'm looking at your information from the your webpage, and you had 195 is the latest number of California jurisdictions changed in a district to district
That's
as a
right.
result of the CVRA. You had 131 school districts. At that time, you had 28 cities, so it's 105?
So if there's only 28 cities on there, that's way out of date, because I can tell you that there's at least 80 cities that have made this switch as a result of the California Voting Rights Act. And I know that there's 30 that already use districts, 29, so that puts you right at around 105.
Okay, so from your own website, it's the whole 195 since CVRA is probably,
I think most of this, honestly, most of these have been in the last year.
okay, so this is probably, we could
Even
probably add a
1
lot
year
of
ago,
numbers.
I think the number of cities that used district elections in the 2014 or 2016 election was only around 50. But I know just in the past year alone, we've been working with at least a dozen cities on making this change, and we're not the only, people doing that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just curious, by the next public hearing, could you get the numbers
I can
of
get the
changes?
exact
I'd
numbers, yeah,
appreciate
for
that,
sure.
thank you. And then, my other question, and this goes back to an earlier comment you made, and I was a little confused with your response to Councilman Bash regarding name. If I was to tell you my last name was Box, you would probably think Caucasian, non-Latino, right? Except that my
Or
son-in-law,
African-American.
my son-in-law is a Latino with the last name of Box.
Yeah.
And his old dad, mom, all Latino.
And
So that's what I get frustrated when you use surnames.
And that's exactly why we don't use surnames.
Okay.
What we use for the real legal analysis for your liability here is eligible votes according to the U.S. Census, where they do a survey, they interview people, and they ask the question, are you Latino? And people have to respond yes or no. That's the question that they use to make the determination. They don't care what your name is. Census actually, they don't even ask your name on most of these forms, or they separate your name out from the data. That's the legal standard. We also do provide, as a way of giving you more information, particularly about voters and where people have turned out to vote, estimates on Latino registration and turnout that do use surname data, but they're not for legal purposes. They're just to give you a very round, very broad number. And because a lot of people ask for that information. When we go to cities, they ask, can we get some approximation of how many Latino voters there are?
Okay.
And so we give you that information, but the real legal one is that citizen voting age population. That's the one we're really using for that legal Voting Rights Act standard.
All right, and now this is going back to your conversation with Councilman Newton. And we'd always, and you're talking about keeping communities of interest together, communities that have the same problems or share the same deal. And on all your maps, and in District 4 and 5, you have separated LMD2, which is the Landscape Maintenance District, in that they all right down El Paso. And that's on all the maps. So those people all have a common interest that live in LMD2. So I would believe that it would be easier to keep them together, because also those people that live up in LMD along that Norco Hills corridor also have the Norco Hills specific plan as a common interest, how they deal with their development and their properties. And then on 4, they have the Norco Ridge Ranch, which again is which you've done up there, and you kept them pretty much together in LMD4. But those communities also have community facility districts, which cost them more in taxes. So they also have a common interest in those. And if you had to represent them, if you just throw them, and I'm not picking on anybody in whose district it is, but you don't want to lose if somebody doesn't have that idea, and he's supposed to be your representative from that district, and he doesn't understand the LMDs or the CFDs and the way they do and impact those. Those people there that live, and that would be the southern section, the southwest section of that, they may not get the representation they need. That's what I'm saying, is for community interest. So if you do look back at that, that might be something to think about, is when you look at that and maybe have to tweak that a little bit to get those. Those are community of interest ideas. They share the same problems and the same concerns. I just throw that out at you. Yeah, I just got a couple more, Kevin. I'll throw back at you. No, I will. And then I guess the final thing is we're going to the public hearing 5. So that's where we have to make a decision, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And either yourself or the city clerk can answer me. What is the deadline for residents to put a comment in? I know you need a 7-day window for these maps to be published before the last hearing, correct?
That's right. We need to have anything available to the entire public 7 days before. So we would probably need it to make sure we got it at least a day before or 2 days before. I think if the city clerk is okay with it, that Monday before, the week before the city council meeting, that would be the 29th. Yeah.
Okay.
Would be a good date.
So we need to put that into the record, correct, on that. All right. And Kevin, go ahead.
Ted makes a very good point, except that do you want to have all of those districts represented by one person? Recently, we had a meeting up there where 3 of us were up there. And do you want to have more than one council person that represents you? Because you could literally have one person that says, go pound sand. Now, for me, I live in an area where there's lots of large lots. Those are the target of developers. And so conceivably, you could actually zone it in such a way that you protect all the large lots, but then the other 4 could get together and they could literally say, hey, let's make that a denser population. I mean, there's so many angles to this thing that, I mean, I get what Ted's saying, but at the same time, is it better to have 2 council people that are beholden to the people or just have 1? Especially when you have charter issues and majority issues and things like that. I guess I'm just a little, that's the problem you actually have with Norco, is that Norco has, in a very real sense, has one community interest. And that's actually what has protected the large lots since 1948. And so it's, quite honestly, when I look at the other cities, I don't see another city that has this situation. So anyway, I just thought I would put in that 2 cents. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. And when you go back to your little map drawing room, and what you may consider is separating LMD2 away from LMD3 and 4 and 5 so that they would be in, say, District 5. So you would have, I don't like to see that LMD separated like it is in your map, just El Paso.
Yeah.
So maybe just take a look at separating so that if it's District 5, and I'm looking at the orange map because it's in front of me, that that wouldn't be split up among a council person.
Yeah.
So perhaps look at that and balance that out, so at least you don't separate that part of it.
Yeah, I know 2, 3, or 3, 4, and 5 were really small enough that we were able to kind of keep them with the bulk of 2. But I know what you're saying, and we can certainly look into.
Yeah, just as long as we
look
don't
into it.
separate,
Yeah.
it gets to be touchy, especially when it comes time to dealing with their annual assessments.
That's
That
right.
you'd rather have, instead of having to deal with 2 council people, and just put them all under one council person for at least that
Yeah.
one district.
And I know it's hard because LMD4 actually is in the same census block as a large chunk of SD2 or LMD2. So.
Yeah.
So.
That's why you get to pay big bucks. Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Comment?
Yes.
So, Ted, with your comments, I'm going to say at this point, I'm not sure if I agree or disagree with your comments on the LMDs. Study that a little further, but I think there could be some advantage to having 2 council members instead of 1. But I want to give that some further thought. So I didn't want to point you in a different direction, but it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, for lack of a better term, you have little ins and outs and pockets and things like that. So my question is, and it probably going to be a city attorney question, that you need this information, some direction with a map before this next meeting. What if we don't have a decision on a map by the next meeting?
I mean,
Is that
no,
John?
To paraphrase, that's actually an interesting question. And there's no real good answer to it. I mean, the 90 days that we're talking about is that the safe harbor period during which Mr. Schenkman isn't, or whoever might sue, isn't entitled to attorney's fees in excess of $30,000. If you didn't adopt something on that date and you adopted it a month later, my expectation is that while he might ask for more, that he probably can't justify any significant amount of attorney's fees because he probably hasn't done anything. That said, the risk you run is what the cities ran before there was the $30,000 cap. And I mean, every city attorney that I've talked to that now has districts and as a result of settlement has said, you know, you're lucky because we didn't have the cap, which protected us, that we ended up providing $500,000 or $1 million in settlement rather than litigate it because we didn't have the cap period. So that's the answer to the question is, who knows, because theoretically he has to justify it. I can't imagine that his staff is spending a great deal of time during this 90-day period preparing maps and doing analysis of the city of Norco when they're in litigation in Poway and Huntington Beach and Fullerton and
Kern County.
Kern County. I mean, they're spread pretty thin themselves. So, I mean, you can't tell Mr. Schenkman is going to come up with big numbers. The other potential is if you didn't do anything or if you do something late and it threatens litigation, is that there's some resolution. And instead of paying $30,000, you pay $50,000. I mean, who knows? It's kind of a who knows. I frankly can't imagine that he can justify any significant amount of fees related to Norco in any case, except that what I expect would do, there won't be attorney's fees particularly, there'll be consultant fees, that he will say, well, my consultant was working on Norco beginning on day 91 until whenever we did something, and that, boy, we spent a lot of hours and $500,000 in time. He's never had to prove any of that. I mean, he makes demands, and no court has, with the exception of Poway, excuse me, with the exception of, I blanked.
Well, I could tell you
Palmdale.
stories, yeah.
Yeah, with the exception of Palmdale, no one has ever addressed the attorney fee issue, and I don't think there was much. Well, no, they addressed the attorney fee issue, but no court has ever said, yes, you're entitled to X amount of attorney's fees or X amount of costs. Because what happens is they settle. Harupa argued, but there was not an award. So, at any rate, that's the answer to your question is it's hard to tell. I expect that a couple days one way or the other isn't going to have any significant impact, but at least we have the protection of the 90-day $30,000 cap.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I just have a question. So I just want to be clear. These judgments, what happens is the city doesn't want to go to court because it costs too much money, and Mr. Schenkman presents bills, and they just pay it?
Well,
I mean, how are these, if it doesn't get to court, what are these gigantic judgments? And isn't there
are no judge, with the exception of Palmdale.
I understand
there are
that.
judgment. There are settlements.
Right.
That means that you argue, you submitted a bill and you say, screw you, we're not going to pay that, and okay, and then you discuss it and you decide, well, this is how much it's going to cost us if we actually have to litigate the amount of fees, and you settle.
Yep, that's exactly what the.
So, no, I mean, I understand that, but we've done it. But my point is that essentially Mr. Schenkman, isn't there some sort of a code of conduct that says he has to give correct bills, or that they just get to make it up? That's my real question. I mean, the truth of the matter is, this is upsetting because Sacramento's full of lawyers, and they're just looking the other way, going, well, just present your bill and it's okay.
And the answer to your question is that Mr. Schenkman will present some bill with some justification, like Harupa Valley, for example.
$900,000 was his bill.
Yes, and if you don't agree with it, which they didn't, you can litigate it, but it
then you cost
you
more money.
That's right. It costs you money to litigate over the bill, and that's the business decision you end up making.
And this is legal.
It is legal. It's
Well, there you
absurd,
go.
but it's legal.
Sacramento's really doing it to us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Levitz, one question. Is Lake Elsinore one of your clients?
Yes.
All right, and just the craziness, and they had their fourth public hearing last night, correct?
That's right.
And just for the audience, if you're not familiar with Lake Elsinore, could you tell them their council makeup?
Oh, gosh. That was the
Try 2 Hispanics
Yeah,
and 1 African American, correct?
that's right.
And did they not get a letter?
They got a letter.
And are they not just going through the same process we are?
And they are drawing crazier districts than anything we've presented in Norco, because they want to make sure that each of their districts has a cross-section of the city, including some of the lake, some of the inside, and they're a city that's grown 15,000 people since 2010, and none of that's on their 2010 census maps.
So, again, it just, and I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I just want folks to know, even a city that has pretty much balance with representation received a letter, and they're going through the same thing we are.
And they asked whether or not they could wait till 2020 because they had grown by so much. And basically, the Schenkman's response was, well, it's your call.
Okay.
Kind of.
Thank you. I just wanted to point that out. I'm going to open the public hearing. Thank you, Council. I'm going to open the public hearing, and with that, for the city clerk, we have received the 4, and then this additional letter tonight that we can put in the public record regarding in the minutes.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, that'll
Thank
be
you.
in the record.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, I'll open the public hearing, and I would imagine you have cards on this.
Yes, Mayor, I do.
Thank you. So I'll open the public hearing. One thing is, we'll try to keep it to 3 minutes so we get everybody down. I know it's a passion deal, but we're going to keep this to comments towards the districting, and please refrain for any personal attacks on any race, gender, or creed, or if you can, would appreciate it. Thank you.
Kurt Knox.
Now attorneys are here. Good evening, Mr. Knox.
Hey, good evening. Thank you. And thank you, council. I've been watching you on your internet page. So I haven't been to a council, but I've been watching you. And the passion you guys present is amazing. It really is incredible. But I'm not in favor nor opposed to this districting. But what I do know is a lot of cities have negotiated settlements. I do know Palmdale has lost millions of dollars. And I do know if we lose, Norco's money is going to go to this lawyer. This lawyer wants us to play this game. My suggestion is don't play his game so he doesn't get his money. Instead, change the charter to where it's nearly impossible to get rid of the horse trails, the land. Make it, I know it's 4/5 right now, but make it 4/5 now, and then a year later, again 4/5. So make it almost impossible to change the charter. Because honestly, we're going to lose this. And we're going to lose money, and it's going to go to the lawyer. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knox.
Gary Schoen.
Good evening, Gary.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I looked at our demographics. I looked at this whole thing. I've kind of studied it since first seeing it on social media. And I see nothing but extortion by this lawyer. I see it serves no purpose to our city. We have approximately 30%, 6,600 Latinos, Hispanics living within the community. I don't think they feel disenfranchised. I would hope they wouldn't. I know we've had a minority on council before. I've never seen a Hispanic run for council. But my thought is to break them up into districts where you take a voice of 6,600 and make them just a voice of a few hundred in each district. To me, that's disenfranchising people, not keeping us as a whole. This community works good the way it is. We are here with a common cause. We want to keep our large land. We want to keep our horse trails. We want to keep our Western theme. And to break this community up, we risk losing that. If we give in to this lawyer, it's no different than our government giving in to a terrorist. He's just making a threat and a demand. And as I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had this thought, I know I'm not because I was talking with the person seated next to me, why do we not get a group of cities together that are the same size roughly and such as ours and fight it as a group? There's power in numbers. So rather than break up our communities to where those who this law is supposed to protect become small numbers instead of one large group, why not get together and keep our people in a large group and get together with other communities and fight this as a group? We're fighting one man. There was another guy running around doing the same thing. I believe it was with all the ADA stuff. It was one lawyer, and he was going around suing everybody. And finally, you know, people fought it. It's not right. We should not have to give in to the extortion of one person who's in this solely for profit, with no benefit to the city, no benefit to the minorities, and no benefit to anybody within the boundaries of Norco. It benefits one person, and that's a lawyer who doesn't live here. And I think we would be fools not to fight this. We would pay for it forever versus paying for it one time to fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Scott DeRosa.
I should probably make one comment just based upon that. Because we're kind of focusing on Mr. Schenkman being the only person, only lawyer who does this. That doesn't happen to be true. Like Palmdale, for example, there were probably 20 different lawyers involved. I agree with the extortion comments and everything else, but it's not simply, boy, if we all get together, we can fight this one guy, because this one guy has a lot of other lawyers that are involved, because, you know, the more that you bill, the more you get paid. It's a pretty simple process. And in terms of getting together and fighting it, unfortunately, each city kind of stands on its own in terms of its own demographics. The part where you can get together and fight is what's happening in Poway, and we are involved in that. And that's the challenge to the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act vis-a-vis the federal constitution or the state constitution. That we're doing, but unfortunately, there's no savings, because it kind of if what we're doing is simply fighting Mr. Shankman or whoever who's attempting to force us into districts, it's all based upon each individual city demographics and whether or not they've had any problems with in the past with racial polarized voting. Otherwise, certainly we share with one another.
Thank you, John. Scott?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, and staff. I'm a resident in what is currently the Bluff area of Norco. And if you recall from a few council meetings ago, I stood at the podium and voiced my opinion that district voting would not be the best fit for Norco. Despite the Press Enterprise article that ran after that evening, in which the reporter wrote that everyone that spoke at the podium were against the district voting, and they were all white. I spoke that night, and I would like to believe that my Portuguese heritage allows me some Latino claim to some degree. Therefore, for the record, the residents that spoke out against district voting that night were not all white. With that being said, I know that myself, my family, and my neighborhood have been treated well and have been well represented by the current and past council members. As you folks know, I grew up on a Chino dairy and with my grandparents. My grandfather had many Norco dairymen as clients for his AI business. I've been practicing real estate as the real estate broker here in Norco for 15 years. I've resided in Norco for the past 5 years, and I have been working as a volunteer for the Economic Development and Advisory Council and other city focus groups for the city of Norco for the past 2 years. Therefore, I do believe I have a true vested interest in the city. As I've already stipulated, I don't believe district voting is a necessity for the city of Norco, as it has been for other cities, such as Pomona, that had to go through the same process. I've heard compelling opinions from locals as well as professionals as to why the city should or should not fight this forced district voting. However, what I have not heard, which is important for me and for my fellow Norconians to hear, is what amount of money would be budgeted for this matter if the city were to fight it. There's a lot of speculation in my industry that the real estate market's going to adjust, and that may be coming sooner rather than later. As most markets adjust, financial hardships are inevitable for not only the people, but also for local governments. I'm sure you can recall the struggles that this city had to endure as a result of the 2008 market adjustment. If this battle were to be taken on, as the residents have urged you to do so, what amount of money would be set aside to fight this battle? Because we've heard some really crazy numbers that have been settlements that are just astronomical. How would this expenditure impact our current city programs and other city needs if this dedicated money is not in the city reserves? If an investment amount is established to go ahead and proceed with this fight, would the city be conservative enough to ensure that there would be enough reserves to carry on business as usual and allow for potential financial hardships should they come sooner rather than later? To conclude, I'm not opposed to fighting the forced district voting, but I do believe a spending cap needs to be established first. I don't want to see the city go bankrupt just for the cause, and I don't want to see the current status quo of city investment into infrastructure and other programs be reduced or eliminated since they have already been, since they're already at the bare bones minimum. And if I was to vote on a map or wish for a map to be selected, I favor the green one right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Because this isn't normal City Hall, we don't have a normal timer, so if I give you the look up and say, hey, it's 3 minutes, it's 3 minutes, the city clerk does have a timer on her clock.
I'll give you a heads up on last 15 seconds.
Thank you.
Larry Eckhoff.
Mayor, council,
Good
staff.
evening, Larry.
Hi. I just want to express my disdain over these districts, but I was gratified that some of the other smart people in Norco had the same idea as I do. Our community of interest is Norco, but I had a little twist on it that we put the districts on top of each other. Now what you're going to say is, and I'm going to answer that really quickly, it's three-dimensionally contiguous. So that's the answer to the question, and that should solve the problem. Now the other thing, and I do disdain this, that's why I'm not drawing dividing us up into maps, because we shouldn't be divided up Norco should not be divided up. The other thing, and I've asked this a couple times, and I know it's a difficult question, if there's a district and you don't have anybody that wants to run, or nobody runs in that district, what do? Now, I've been told that you pick someone, and I've said, really? You pick someone? And then poor Cheryl explained that that's exactly what would happen, that you would have to pick somebody. But as horrible a job as being on city council is, the way you are treated, the great job you do, but the way you're treated, who would want to do it? I don't know why you want to do it. So it's a serious thing, and doesn't it defeat the whole purpose if you were to put out like a job advertisement and people would put an application and say, I want to be a city councilman. And the way I understood it, correct me if I'm wrong, that the city council would pick the person from that district? Wouldn't it be obviously self-serving?
The seated council would appoint somebody who was a resident of that district to serve on the council.
The city
until
council.
the next election, right.
So they would vote?
That's actually not unusual. I mean, in fact, this council, on a number of occasions, has appointed an individual to
but again, the question, and it could be possible that nobody wanted to run. What would happen? You just wouldn't have a city council person until one was picked? That's what it would happen?
Well, I mean, actually, I don't know that as a practical matter, that would occur if nobody decided to run. You'd know that within the time which you had to file your intention to run, and I expect that an appointment would occur approximately the same time as when an election would take place. So.
Okay, but that would take away from the voters' rights. I mean, it puts it back on the council to pick somebody, rather than have a vote.
Yeah.
And that's all I got. Thank you.
Mike Williams.
Good evening, Mike.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Hoffman, council members and staff. Appreciate the opportunity while I put my over 50 glasses on here so I can read what I'm supposed to. I'm a little out of my element, so please bear with me. My wife Sigrid would have been here, but she's teaching at Cal State Fullerton tonight, so. It concerns my wife Sigrid and I that a husband-wife law firm in Malibu has found a way to bully you, our city representatives, into potentially districting the city of Norco and disenfranchising and oppressing the registered voters of this city who participate in our democratic process by voting for whom we believe will represent us to the best of their ability. The California Constitution guarantees fundamental rights to California voters, specifically against polarized voting and discriminatory practices of voting. Nowhere have we seen in this city's election process or its practices denial of access, or discriminatory practices against the minority population that live within this city. Nowhere in our community can it be shown that our at-large election policy impairs the ability of protected class voters to elect a candidate of their choice. On the contrary, our at-large elections allow for all voices to be heard, which also gives the protected minority group a stronger standing. Why would you even consider limiting this process by instilling a districting policy just because other cities have? We do not have a community with a protected class concentrated geographically in one area which is disenfranchised because of our election process. This city is not diluting the voting strength of a protected minority group, which is the substance of the California Voting Rights Act. In fact, leaving our election process as is strengthens them as a whole, allowing them to vote for all 5 of our representatives, not just one. Removing this essential element of democracy from our community can cause alienation and ultimately burden our city government and the efficiency of running our rural and proud community at its fullest. According to the Norco demographer timeline, districting like this would take place this year and again in 2021. We do need more information and greater in-depth analysis before this city makes such a change. For instance, have you taken into consideration that districting in 2018 and redistricting in 2021 may in fact alienate a number of voters, violating their rights to vote? Voters that may vote in 2018 may fall within a new district in 2021 and will be prevented from voting until 2024. What would you say to these voters that would be alienated from our democratic election process? What about potential candidates? By districting, you compromise and limit our rights and elect those. By districting, you compromise and limit our rights to elect those we believe will represent all of us to the best of their ability and support the lifestyle that we have all become accustomed to.
About 15 seconds, Mike.
Districting is not a viable option. We implore you to think long and hard on your decision during this time and make decisions that make sense for all of the residents of this city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We got the letter here, too. Thank you.
Corinne Holder.
Good evening, Corinne.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, someone pointed out I only get 3 minutes, so I'm going to start with a thank you because I will run out of time. A thank you to staff and all of our council members for putting forth this effort. I really appreciate Andy and our city clerk, Cheryl, going and talking to our different groups, trying to get the information out as much as possible, using social media, all of the efforts that everyone has gone through. It's a lot of work, so I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing to try and get information out there and get it to as many people as possible. Oh boy. You have my previous letter. I've spoken already. And I was happy to see that there were new maps popped up today. But as I looked at them, I kind of felt that they really didn't serve the purpose of the critiques that we've given, even though the demographer says that they sort of do. And I can see that a lot of them maybe concentrate our sort of set communities instead of the sort of east-west, north-south. They've kind of tried to compact them a little bit and keep them in their own little areas. But one of my critiques previously, and a number of people have noticed, is that our Hamner and 6th Street corridors are not exactly evenly distributed. And I feel that this problem is a little more exacerbated by the new maps, that a couple of these areas, one of them in particular, it has a huge swath of Hamner and 6th Street. And not all of Hamner is equally, monetarily, accessible and gives us lots of fun stuff. Same as 6th Street, but some of these sections seem a little bit out of whack to me in terms of just what those people are going to represent. And I feel like in the long run, it kind of leads us into bad areas of people coming in to represent a district that maybe have some bad intentions. So I really don't like that. Same with the LMDs. You guys have already talked about that. We know that those are going to be an issue, and I don't see that those have been solved in any of these maps. Last council meeting, there was some issues with the population deviation, and all three of these maps increase the population deviation rather than making them smaller and helping us out in creating districts that have an even population. So I found that very interesting in reading all of the statistics on the back. All of them have increased our population deviation. So I thought that was a little interesting that it was brought up and now it's worse. So my main question, and I'm going to pick on the orange map just because, and the question would, I assume, go to the demographer.
15 seconds.
In the election timing, if you were to use the and/or of District 5 and District 2, we lose one council member automatically. But if we don't elect someone for District 3, then it's left open. And that issue exists on both maps that have the option of one or the other. So no matter what you do, sort of, there's a space left out. So I'm not sure how, does that go back again to then you guys just appoint someone? So that's a question for the demographer. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne.
Linda Dixon.
Good evening, Linda.
Good evening, everybody. I think the one thing that this has done is something that no election has been able to do since 1964, and that's unite this community. I'm noticing that very few people want to go through with districting. Most people want to fight this. We do have some concern on the budget, how much money it's going to take, but you know what? If we go with districting and over the next 2 elections, people are voted in that do not agree with the lifestyle, what good is this money going to do? So I would say absolutely, fight this. Don't turn in these maps. These maps are pretty much useless, actually. For the first, I've been left off every map. My street is not on there. I know that it's been the wish for many people. However, I would like to know if our little map drawers have actually gotten in a car with anyone who knows Norco and has driven around these streets, and how many other streets have been left off of these maps. I would say fight this. I'm not going to go into the demographics. I'm not going to go into all of the details. But while I'm still a resident in Norco before these maps are adopted, I would just like to say we really need to fight this. And I think that our Hispanic community moved to this town the same way that we all have for the lifestyle. I don't think there's any difference. I think we're all here for one reason, and I say fight it.
Thank you, Linda.
Sue Bacon.
Good evening, Sue.
Good evening, Mayor. Today when I was driving around with my work, I was listening to a radio station, and they were talking about the national voting situation and the redistricting throughout the country, and how different areas have been, as their term was, jerry-rigged. What they have found out is whatever major party is in, certain voting elements get favored and not. Sadly, it didn't matter. What occurred was less turnout and a feeling that people were not being heard. I didn't even know we had a minority group in Norco. I've been a member of Horsemen, Horse Week, Fair Committee. I'm on the board of the Lake Norconian Club. We have a well-rounded group in all of them. As Linda Dixon said, I feel the Hispanic community, as I see them on the trails, came here for large lots, and for horses, as I did. And all I see with this districting is division. And we're doing it on a census that's asked the question, are you an ethnic group? How do you identify yourself? Are you legal? Are you illegal? Are you a citizen? This is absurd. And this is extortion. This isn't what Norco's about. And yet we're making it about it. We're making this division. We're highlighting this terribly negative feeling about our community. I don't want to see that happen. We need to be uniting this town, getting people involved, getting volunteers out, not dividing it. Dividing it, we're going to fall.
Thank you, Sue.
J.T. Guru.
Good evening, JT.
Thank you, Mayor, council members, and staff. This is pretty dang complicated, and I'm not too good with all that stuff, but my main question is you go to this districting and you get to vote once every 4 years for one person. Right now, I vote every 2 years. So you are taking my voting right away from me by districting. Thank you.
Thank you, JT.
Pat Overstreet.
Good evening, Pat.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
I just turn it, Pat. Turn it down there. There you go.
Public hearing number 4, I want to officially, again, state my distaste for districting. Norconians know that no matter how we draw these districts, it's going to ensure disaster, destruction, and demise of Norco's A120 zoning and our rural lifestyle. I'm totally against acquiescing to the nameless extortionists, if there's more than just one. I literally pray Norco fights this debacle. I'm delighted to learn that there's some sort of resistance with somehow combining with the other cities. Everyone up here has already stated my feelings. I know I turned a map in with parallel lines rather than gerrymandering. And at first it looked silly, but the more I thought about it, I thought it actually includes all areas of Norco. Just if you have to have a requirement of 4,500 residents, you just make them narrow or fatter, but you literally crisscross the entire town. But I'm totally against districting. I've been here 40 years. I don't want to see at-large go away. And I hope you do fight it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Wendy Stevens Rodriguez.
Evening, Wendy.
Council, I listened to the video this afternoon of the last council meeting. I agree with what you said. You spoke very well. Kevin did well. Robin knocked it out of the park. Cervantes and Roth are our representatives, their legislatures. When their reps come here, I have not heard much about this issue, even though it has been going on. I think that they should come here, talk to us, and help us work this out and fix it. Does Calvert have any influence here? He's a congressman. He's a legislator. Does he? No. Okay. Well, then, Ted was saying, I think in 2003, that they changed this law so that the population covered 100,000 as opposed to Norco. Roth, Cervantes, come here. Your legislators, help us out. You've left us behind. Fix it.
Thank you, Wendy. Just for clarification, the CVRA is known as CVRA 2001, and it was adopted in 2003. There have been some amendments to it, though.
Mike Thompson?
Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, council. I have a question for the attorney, kind of a hypothetical. If council was to decide to go to a district, could they do it under protest? And if the lawsuits that all the cities are involved in were to progress to prove this is an unconstitutional process, with the districts under protest, could you fall back to at-large voting?
Well, you could literally fall back, but there's no obligation to stay with district when you go through the same process.
So that could be included in language somehow to where,
You don't even need to. I mean,
oh, okay.
It's not permanent, just like at-large is permanent.
Okay, cool. So that way we could go back if, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Jeff Kahan?
Hi, Jeff.
A little taller than Pat.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I've made my position fairly clear, so I'm a little bit repetitive, but I want to just be on record. I understand when we vote for the president, we vote by state. When we vote for congressmen, we vote by district. We have a congressional district, we have an assembly district, we have a state senate district. I get that because the areas that they cover are so large that they need to be done that way. In Norco, we're so small, we really don't need it. And I know everybody's pretty much said that. And I look at Corona. Okay, Corona's what, 150,000 plus. You divide them into 5 districts, that's a 30,000 person district. Well, if we're 25,000, we're smaller than a single district in a neighboring town. So clearly, we can survive as a single town if we're smaller than the neighboring city's district. Now, I have a legal question, and I'm not a lawyer, and this is sort of rhetorical, but I don't understand how Mr. Shakedownman can file a lawsuit when he has no standing. I know that's a legal principle, but if this has never been litigated before, has anybody brought up the point that he has no standing? Now, I would understand if a Hispanic in town wanted to fight and bring a lawsuit because they were disenfranchised or whatever, but how does he have a leg to even present this?
The law firm doesn't. I mean, he would not be he's not the plaintiff.
Then who is the plaintiff, if we get that far?
We haven't gotten that far.
Is it the state of California versus Norco?
No, it'd be some resident of Norco.
So he would have to find somebody in Norco in order to actually be...
Yes, yes.
Okay, so if we try to fight this, and he can't find anybody, then that's the end of the road, right? Okay, rhetorical. I only got a couple of minutes, so
Yeah,
I don't want you to...
the answer is that there has to be a plaintiff. If no plaintiff steps forward, then there's no lawsuit.
Okay, so here's my bottom line. I am sick to death of being accused of being a racist. And that's what this law basically is doing, is it's calling our town racist. And everything that we've discussed about the demographics and how to divide the city up and to keep certain pockets, it's basically, now, if we decided we wanted to do districts as a city because it really would benefit us for other reasons and all that stuff, the fact that this guy is shoving it down our throats is what really makes me angry. So I understand this could cost us some money, but at some point there are certain fights that are just worth fighting. So I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Just so there's no confusion, at least from my point of view, I don't believe that Mr. Schenkman or LULAC or whoever would propose to proceed with the lawsuit will have any trouble finding a single plaintiff. I mean, that's another world. That ain't gonna happen.
And it's made, that person's made public?
Of course.
Please refrain. All right. We got to continue the public hearing.
Mayor, that concludes public comments.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Linda Fong.
Yep.
Good evening, Linda.
Good evening, council. Down, short. Okay, so what if we're not against districting? Okay, now, if we move forward, how do we abolish it? Okay, so just move quickly, do this, get rid of the lawyer guy, and then abolish the districts. What is the procedure? I was trying to look up law, I'm not a lawyer, in abolishing the districts. How do we get them undone once they're done?
It's the same process that we're going through now.
Good.
I mean, except that then we're back in the same boat, and if the law hasn't changed and it hasn't been interpreted any differently, Mr. Schenkman gets to write another letter.
Well, it's worth, we don't have the money to fight. I don't think we have the money to fight. It hasn't been determined what that money amount would be. It's easier to move forward, do it, and then abolish it, because we don't have to stay in districts. That's it. We don't need districts.
Thank you. That's it.
I don't have any more cards on this item.
Okay, that closes the public hearing for public hearing number 4, and I'll bring it back to council. Greg, start down there, unless staff has something. John, any answering the questions that came up?
No, I mean, well, we kind of commented as throughout the hearing, but the purpose tonight is to receive input from the public and council on the maps. To the extent that the council has additional, input, now is the appropriate time. Otherwise, the demographer is taking his notes, and he will continue to get comments up until the maps are prepared.
Thank you. Before I bring it back to council, Cheryl, we have January 29th, correct?
Monday, January 29th.
Okay. And Andy, any other?
I believe there are some questions that the demographer
Right,
needs to
and I'm
answer.
going to. Okay. Dr. Levitz?
I just want to clarify that January 29th is only for new maps. You can continue to send feedback, letters of support of, anything to do with the process, any particular map, all the way up into and including public hearing number 5. We're happy to listen to you testify again at that hearing as well.
Thank you. All right, now bringing it back to council. Greg?
Can answer the questions.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for speaking, attending, and all your input. Some good comments. Scott's concern about budget is, to me, well received. Hard to answer at this time that what's the dollar amount and how far you go. Kind of the way I look at this is, if we get into a fight, we got to have the ammunition, and we have to come forward with the best map possible, that in case you lose, you don't want a judge drawing your districts for you. So I believe that we have to continue working on the maps. But I don't want to be held to a deadline, and that's why I brought it up before, what happens after public hearing number 5. I believe these maps still need to be worked on extensively, and that we just got to have our act together. And I think that's not only the maps, but if we're going to go ahead and fight with it, and I'm not trying to insult anyone, but we would have to look at what demographer we'd want on our team, and we'd have to look at what attorney we want on our team, and what we want to spend dollar-wise to pursue it. So I think there's still a lot of work to move forward with it, and I appreciate everybody's input, and I'm still making notes and seeing how we can try to encompass everyone's concern, but I want to put our best foot forward on this. That's all I have right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Kevin?
Well, I was very impressed with the comments. The level of understanding is pretty amazing. And a couple of just clarifications. Several of us, council members, approached League of Cities 2 years ago and said, boy, this districting thing is not cool. And we were told then we were probably too small, probably don't worry about it. But what we've also discovered is that there's many cities that support this. And so there's pieces of luck that are coming, and one of the lucks is they're starting to hit the Northern California cities that are democratically held going, we're not racist. So we have a piece of luck that's working that way. But the League of Cities was no help whatsoever. I am going to take this to WRCOG. I'm very disappointed right now in our elected officials. I know they're throwing their hands up and they're saying, gee, we can't do anything. But again, remember, Mr. Shankman essentially is the point man for the state legislature. They could change this, but they don't. And people have tried to make assaults on it and they haven't. I'm not so certain, since in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, and right now I don't like many lawyers, no offense, because lawyers aren't shouting to the moon. They're going, oh, it's legal, but it's not ethical. And any lawyer that isn't saying something, I have a problem with. No offense. But since it is a violation of the Federal Voting Act, why aren't we approaching Congressman Calvert? He's running for office. And why aren't we saying, dude, you need to start yelling for us? And I realize these are probably dead ends, but I also know this is the first battle in what I perceive to be a war. I think other cities are going to be, they're upset. Mr. Knox, I've thought a lot about, even before you said that, one of the things I think we need to really look at, and I suggested at the last meeting, is prepare for after this. One is, how do we ensure, now one of the things we have in place that helps us is the charter, but how do we break up our city and find ways that we force who's ever on council to do certain things? I know Marietta and some of the other cities that are being forced to do this are looking at ways to go, okay, well, who's ever in council 10 years from now, they're still going to support whatever our lifestyle is. Remember, what can happen here is you can get a district where you get a developer. That what they want to do is they get 3 people, they use money. In fact, we've had developers over the years, they move right into town. They're here for years. They're Cub Scout leaders, and then you find out they're trying to build something. I think that's something we need to look at. So what do we do to protect? Standing is a very interesting issue. The problem is that Mr. Shankman may go away, but then there's 20 other lawyers that go, whoa, 30,000, 30,000. He might end up paying 20, 30,000s. A very interesting argument that I had not heard was we are denying people their right to vote every 2 years. That's incredible. So I'm pretty impressed with that. I'm like, wow, that's something that's interesting. And remember, this benefits the legislation of the state of California. Because as we all know, there's certain things that are happening right now that I don't know what they're doing. The truth of the matter is I have no idea what goes on in Sacramento. But I guess that's all I have to say, Mr. Mayor, right now. Again, I'm so impressed with the level of understanding of this situation. It's just, Sigrid and some of the other people, it's amazing to me, and I'm very impressed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. Robin?
I don't have too much to say that's different than what I said last week, other than the fact when we look at moving forward with this. I think we need to make sure that we have a lot of different options available. I think taking the route of putting pressure on our legislators is a very important piece of this. And I know we can talk to them and they can say, well, there's nothing we can do. But quite frankly, that's not true. If enough of their constituents speak up, and if there's enough of us that aren't happy of it, they want to get reelected. That's what politicians do, right? So if we can make it a big enough deal where it can potentially impact election campaigns and things like that, I think there can be a difference made in that respect. And some of the other things that have been brought up, like Kevin said, the reasoning and the thought behind what you guys have brought forward to the council has all been very, very good. And I've seen the growth in comments and the depth of knowledge increase over the time that we've had the hearings, and I'm so happy about that. And I commented last week, the passion that Norconians have over this, that we've gotten so many comments and people are getting involved, is very, it's exciting to me. And Linda mentioned earlier, we're united, which is nice, and I'm excited about that. I just am not one person, a person that throws up their hands and says, well, we can't, it's just a done deal and this is the way it is. And I look at this issue that way as well. And then the other thing, and I'm going to call you out again, our company doing the demographer, we've asked for somebody to come and go around town with us, and that hasn't happened yet. Again, I would request that that happens. And everybody in here knows Norco's really special, and there's only one Norco, and we're super unique. And I think that taking some time to go around town with us is going to maybe open some eyes to some of the comments, because seeing something and then hearing the comments, it's going to be two totally different things. You can tell people about Norco all day long, but until they drive down the streets and actually see those neighborhoods, it doesn't make sense. And so I would ask again that that time be designated at some point in time. I know schedules are hectic and I know things are hard. In fact, the last meeting we had, I was in a car driving back from Sacramento, one of my favorite places to go as well. So I would again request publicly that we try and make some time for that to happen as we look at the maps, because these little tweaks that people are talking about, that's where you're going to see those things and go, okay, I get it. And it's not just about numbers on a paper. Maybe the numbers on the paper match up to what we're trying to communicate to you up to this point. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I pretty much said what I had to say the other night about this guy's evidently never been contested real hard and everything, but I appreciate everybody's comments tonight, and I hope that more people come out at the next hearing and everything, because I've received nothing but positive comments on emails and stuff like that, and I can't imagine any one person would want to be made public that would be that plaintiff in this town, as loyal as everybody is about this thing. And I just can't imagine anybody would do that, but I'm sure there's somebody that would. But we're just going to have to keep rolling forward and do what we can do and hope for the best, and everybody keep a positive attitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Berwin. You got it now? Thank you, Berwin. You know, it's real easy as we get up here, and we're all guilty of this, and I am too, to pick on Senator Roth and Assemblywoman Cervantes on this thing and ask them why they haven't fixed this. And so I did my homework like anybody else and figured why they haven't. Well, Cervantes has been on the Assembly a year. This has been going on since 2001. It was enacted in 2002. And the changes have occurred. So I'm not going to defend her. She's not helping us on this thing. Senator Roth, he's done some good for us in this area. And he's done a lot of good. But I tell you where it goes, and if you've ever been up to the swamp in Sacramento and see how things work, the Speaker of the House is who determines what bills go through and what bills don't go through. Kevin De Leon is not going to do anything to touch the CVRA the way it stands. Attorney General Becerra is not going to do anything to touch the CVR the way it stands. They've actually gone through and tried to make this worse for us as our communities. So I look at Sacramento and see that swamp, and the only way you're going to fix that is you vote those people out. We don't have any choice. You got to start from the top and work on down to clean the swamp, as they say. So that was just to defend the comments on Cervantes and Roth. I look and I see the 90 comments that NDEC got, and I appreciate that because I think you guys are doing a good job. From the first public hearing we had, everything was no, 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 no. And now to hear there's comments about districts and what we want, what we're trying to do, because we got our backs against the wall. So for the residents that have put those comments in, we here in the council, at least I do, I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you're trying to do for us, because we need your help. This is not our problem. This is your problem. We got to fix this. We're a community. As we looked at the maps, and when you start looking at the maps in the future, and that's what, and Linda Dixon alluded to that. Where do we go? If this thing sits in the courts for years on this federal case, right now, we have a pretty cohesive council. And we have a lot of cohesive people in this community that are making sure we try to stay together and continue our lifestyle. So when we look at these districts, we have to make sure that what happens, because just like the demographer said, there's not going to be a lot of changes in the census tract. And we have that. If you look at our history, we don't change much. So what happens in 10 years from now when these same districts are here, when people get elected? I can't make that. I don't have a little crystal ball here to tell me that. So that's why we really have to be careful in how we put these districts together so that we treat everybody fairly. And that's my feeling on it. If I district up with another person and I don't get elected, I don't get elected. But I just want what's best for us in the future, not the short term. And I do appreciate the additional maps. And the reason I appreciate the additional maps is because when we look at this, and if we go to battle on this thing, we have to show that we tried to get as balanced as we can. I know it gets more confusion as we get more maps and people have their own priorities to do it. But it is important that we listen to what you've said, and we've tried to incorporate that in there. So for that, Dr. Levitz, thanks. And for Dr. Levitz, I'll challenge you to, I think Mayor Pro Tem Grunmeyer has already said it, and I'm sure she'd take some time out of her busy day to take you a trek around town. So please make that one of your priorities if you could. I'm going to go back to my days in the Sheriff's Department. Whenever I went up against somebody, I try to learn as much as I could about them. And we've already talking about the attorney. One of the things in his letter, he quoted the Southwest Voter Rights Education Program, SVRP. And in this letter, this was last year, it's hard to believe, but the 2018 election season is already beginning. This cycle of the SVREP will build on the 15-16 voting rights action that obliged numerous Southern California jurisdictions to switch to single-member district elections beginning in 16 and 18. Based upon successful voting right actions in 2016, he lists off a whole bunch of cities that they're going to now go to districts, just like we know. And then he comes in here, we will identify dozens more unfair Southern and Central California local election systems. Our allies at Shankman and Hughes will take them to court if needed and catalyze new district-based election systems, which will in turn create bases for Latino voter registrations, local minorities, candidacies for office, and so on. So they've been doing their homework. They've been doing what they're supposed to do, because that's what they're doing. They're not only doing it here in California, they're trying to tear Texas apart. They're already going into Arizona. They're creeping in Nevada. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing as their group. Interesting, and like I said, I like to know who I'm dealing with, because that's who Mr. Shankman says his members of the SVREP claim in his letter to our city was there he was. So what they do is they do great things. They have Latino academies. Believe it or not, in February, there will be a Latino academy to recruit Latinos on February 3rd over here at Morongo to run in 70 jurisdictions that they've got earmarked throughout the state. This is what they do. They're doing their homework. We're late. They've been doing this. So like I said, I like to know who our people are, and it talks about areas throughout the state, but mostly Southern California, that they've earmarked 70 jurisdictions, and yes, we're on there. So when I look at the SVREP and thinking what they're doing, and thinking what our state of California has become, and I'm not criticizing the state, I'm criticizing our elected officials up in Sacramento. I'm going to use my racetrack analogy. We have a horse, we're trying to, and it doesn't run very good on a dirt track. Why are we keeping it on that dirt track when we can go to a turf track and see if it works better? And several of you have expressed this, and let me finish out why that analogy works. All these other cities have tried to fight this in state court, have lost. They've all gone through litigation. Palmdale paid a pretty penny. Several of you express, why are we keeping this, how much money can we use to fight it? I'm sorry, I'm not going to bet on a lousy dirt track if our horse isn't going to run on it. Why do I want to keep it in the state court? So I want to throw it in the turf course and maybe join in on these other people and on federal court, which to me seems like a better option if I wanted to spend money. I'm not going to I don't want to fill Shanksman's wallet with any of more of our hard-earned money. He's already going to get $30,000 from us. We're going to pay the demographers here $25,000 on their contract. No offense, Dr. Levitz. And probably staff time and everything else involved, and Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, we can double that. We got $100,000 into this puppy, and we ain't even been to court yet. We work hard for that. You work hard for that. This is your money. So I look at it that way as, where do we go? Where do we fight it? And I would hope the rest of my council people will help me on this thing. I think it's time that, like our attorney says, we're on the federal court level. We're not going to win in state court. That dirt track ain't going to go nowhere. We're going to be like everybody else and die because of what our state has become. So that's just my 2 cents worth of it. So, like I said, I'm all for running a horse that'll win. Bearing that in mind, I'm going to close this public hearing on hearing number 4 on districts. Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin.
I agree with a lot of what Ted said. There is an effort in some of the cities to get into federal court, but the one place I do disagree fundamentally, I completely understand how Sacramento operates. I completely understand what Mr. De Leon is going through and what he does, and Mr. Becerra. I know those are the 2 stumbling blocks. I also know that their block is crumbling. It's crumbling. Now, they still may be able to stop things, but also, just as an elected official, if you come to me and you want me to represent your community, I think we have every right that those elected officials, rather than go, and I like Senator Roth, I supported him and I'll continue to support him, but they should be speaking up for us at the very least, supporting us and understanding the communities that they represent. What I feel like is that, and no offense to the demographer, you know what I feel like? Just so you know, every city that's gone through this does exactly what we're doing now. Everybody complains, we get wonderful letters. I feel like we're a worm on a hook and they're just looking at us going, there's not much we can do. We're not even going to drive your city. And that's what I feel like. And so at least we can get the embarrassment factor. And in terms of Congressman Calvert and the senator, I was very offended that I love Justin to death. He's great, but he walked out in the middle of this hearing. And that's upsetting to me because I want to feel like the people I'm voting for at least are listening and fighting for us. Unfortunately, my model is not good. There's a movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and of course there's a line where he says, I only fight battles I know I'm going to lose. But you know, maybe there's a point where there's enough cities that we do stand up and the people begin to talk. I totally agree with Ted. I think try to get to the federal courts. Again, last week I talked about what's happening in Marietta. I hope somebody is going to contact them finally. I've given the name of the person who's heading that. And, but I think, Ted, you made some very good points, except I think our elected officials need to understand how upset we are, and we're not just another group of residents on a fishhook. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. And believe it or not, when I told Justin Duell, somebody, Cervantes' office, I said, one of the upsetting thing about this, and JT, you hit it right on the head, every 4 years we only get to vote for one. And that, he looked at me, their representative goes, oh, never thought about that. Yes, never thought about that. Anyway, with that, I'll close this public hearing, and we'll see you. For those of you who want more information, the city manager will be at the Rule meeting tomorrow night there at the 6th Street Deli. If you want some more information on districting, perhaps you can talk a little bit more. So I'm adjourning this. Thank you. I'm sorry.